My name is Julia Monroe. I'm 37 years old, a single mom, and for the past 8 years, I've lived like I didn't have a family. That wasn't by choice. I didn't leave for the thrill of starting over. I left because staying would have broken me into pieces I couldn't have put back together. And I had a little boy who needed me whole. Some families bury you long before you're dead, but sometimes your child's voice can dig you out. Before we dive in, where are you listening from right now? What's your story? Drop it in the comments. It had been 8 years since I'd sat across from any of them. 8 years since I packed a suitcase with more fear than clothes. Scooped up my son Eli, he was 2 at the time, and left without a goodbye. No one followed me. No one asked why. They'd already written me out of the story. So when a plain white envelope showed up 3 days after my father's funeral, I thought it was a mistake. No return address, just the date, time, and the name Connor and Marks. Attorneys at law. That name I recognized. Mr. Connor had been my dad's lawyer for as long as I could remember. I didn't even consider going, not until Eli asked if we could. He looked up at me that morning, brown eyes too, knowing for 10 years old, and said, "Maybe there's something you need to hear, Mom." He had no idea how much those words gutted me. Because part of me still hoped for something, anything, that said I mattered to the man who hadn't spoken to me since the night I showed up on his porch with a black eye and a toddler in my arms. But I nodded, pulled my old funeral dress out of the back of the closet, braided Eli's hair with shaking hands. He told me I looked beautiful. I told him he was brave. And we drove across town in silence. The law office hadn't changed. Same brass doorknob, same faded flag in the window, same stale air inside that smelled like cigars and lemon furniture polish. What had changed was how it felt to walk in, like stepping back into a room where the walls already hated you. They were all there. Karen, my older sister, sat at the head of the table like she owned the place. She wore that gray suit she always used when she wanted to feel superior. Hair pulled back tight, red lipstick like war paint. Her husband, Neil, was beside her. Rick, my uncle, Dad's older brother, was slouched 2 seats down, already smirking, like he'd just remembered a joke only he found funny. I wasn't greeted. I wasn't even acknowledged. The moment I stepped into the room, Karen tilted her chin and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "She will get nothing." Dad hated her. No one blinked. Rick chuckled. My son's hand tightened in mine. I didn't say a word, just held Eli's fingers like they were the only solid thing in the room and led us to the furthest chair at the end of the table. I hadn't seen most of the people gathered since before I left. Cousins, a couple of Dad's old co-workers, one of the neighbors who used to drop off casseroles when Mom was sick. But they didn't look at me like someone they used to know. They looked at me like an interruption, like I was a loose end they'd hoped stayed cut. Karen eventually turned her head toward me and smiled, but it wasn't real. It was that tight, smug smile people wear when they think they've already won. "You know this is pointless, right?" she said. "Dad rewrote the will, said you were dead to him." I didn't reply. I couldn't. My tongue felt like it belonged to someone else, so I just nodded small, mechanical, and looked at the wood grain of the table. Eli sat next to me, legs too short to reach the floor, hands folded in his lap like he was in church. He didn't speak, but I could feel his eyes moving, watching. Uncle Rick leaned back in his chair, arms behind his head like he was getting ready for a show. "Even her kid knows she's worthless," he muttered, nodding at Eli like he wasn't even a person. That was the moment my heart cracked a little deeper, but Eli didn't flinch. He just lowered his eyes and stayed still, like he knew the storm was already here, and we just had to wait it out. Mr. Connor walked in a few minutes later, right on time, carrying a thick folder under one arm. He looked just like I remembered, neatly dressed, tired around the eyes, no expression on his face. The room went still. Everyone sat up straighter. I braced myself to be erased. Connor opened the file, cleared his throat, and began reading. Legal language, property clauses, names I expected to hear. Karen, Rick, a few others, not mine. Each time he paused to turn a page, my chest tightened, like maybe, just maybe, he'd say my name. But he didn't, not once. Then came the sentence I knew was coming, as previously declared. My daughter Julia will not receive a portion of this estate. It hit like a body blow. Final. Cold. Karen let out a smug little exhale. Rick shook his head. I gripped Eli's hand under the table and tried to keep my breathing steady. I didn't cry. Not yet, but the tears were waiting, hot and bitter, just behind my eyes. I stared down at the table again and wondered for the 100th time, why did I come? And then Eli moved. He let go of my hand, sat up straighter, and in the softest, clearest voice, he said, "You forgot the video." The room froze. Karen blinked. Rick shifted. Connor's pen hovered midair. And I turned to look at my son, my quiet, steady son, and realized the story wasn't over, not even close. At first, I thought maybe Eli had misspoken. "You forgot the video," he'd said, his voice quiet but clear. The whole room paused, like someone had pressed the mute button. Karen looked confused, Rick annoyed, and even Mr. Connor blinked like the words didn't make sense. For a second, I just stared at my son, unsure if I'd heard him right. Then he reached into his backpack, calm as ever, and pulled out a small white envelope. It was slightly wrinkled, like it had been moved around or handled often. My name was written on the front, but what stopped my breath cold was the handwriting underneath. "For the lawyer only if it gets ugly." That was my dad's handwriting. Sharp, blocky, all caps, the way he always wrote when he wanted something taken seriously. My whole body tensed. "Eli," I said, barely above a whisper, "where did you get that?" He looked up at me and said, simply, "Grandpa gave it to me a while ago. He said to keep it safe." I blinked hard, trying to push through the fog in my head. "When that time I went with Mr. Glenn to drop off his ladder, you were working. Grandpa said we could talk for a bit. He gave it to me then. I remembered that day. It had seemed so small at the time, my neighbor Glenn offering to take Eli with him for a quick errand. I was buried in a deadline, and Eli had begged to go. I didn't think anything of it. I had no idea they even spoke. Now, it felt like everything had been leading to this moment. Mr. Connor stood slowly and held out his hand. May I, Eli, handed over the envelope without a second thought, like it wasn't the most powerful object in the room, but to me, it might as well have been a grenade. I could hear the tension in the room rise with every breath. Karen was squinting now, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Rick was sitting up straighter. A couple of my cousins leaned in. Connor carefully opened the envelope, pulling out a USB drive and a single sheet of paper. He scanned the page in silence. Then something shifted. His face didn't move much, but I caught it. A crack in his professional shell. When he looked up, his voice was lower. "There is a video, a message from Charles Thomas, dated prior to the final version of this will. He left instructions very clear, ones that it should only be played if things became contentious." He didn't need to explain further. The room had turned ugly the second I walked in. Rick scoffed. "That could be anything. Anyone could have made that." Karen crossed her arms, shaking her head. This is ridiculous. He never mentioned a video to me. Connor raised one hand gently. It's authenticated. I recognize the signature. The timestamp checks out, and legally, I'm required to play. He walked over to a desk against the wall and pulled out a laptop. The screen lit up. Blue login screen, folder click, black frame, one word. Play. No one said a thing. I couldn't feel my legs. My hands were gripping the armrests so tightly, I thought the wood might splinter. I didn't know what was coming, but Eli just sat beside me, still and calm, like he already knew. While Connor set up the video, my mind spun. My body was still in that room, but my thoughts weren't. I was back in the driveway of my father's house. The night everything fell apart. Eli was just a baby. I had bruises, a bag packed with nothing but diapers, a toothbrush, and 3 changes of clothes. I remember standing there shivering on the porch and ringing the bell. I remember thinking he'd let me in. He didn't. He opened the door, looked at me at Eli and said, "You made your bed, now lie in it." Then he shut the door. I didn't cry then. I didn't scream. I just picked up my son and walked away. People love to paint women like me as quitters, but they never ask what staying costs. No one in that family ever asked why I left. Not once. They just filled in the blanks with their own stories. Karen told anyone who'd listen that I couldn't handle real life, that I abandoned the family, that she was the one who stayed and sacrificed. And she made sure everyone saw it. Every doctor visit with Dad posted, every holiday photo tagged, every care package labeled and praised. But they didn't see the other side. That staying made her cruel, that she used her loyalty like a weapon. As for Rick, he parroted everything Dad said. Blood is loyalty. You don't walk away from family. Easy things to say when you've never been on the other side of the door. They all bought into the story that I was the problem. Not once did they ask what he said to me that night. Not once did they wonder what I was escaping. So I built a life outside their story. A little apartment, a job at a bakery, nights reading to Eli on a couch that had springs poking out, birthdays with cupcakes instead of cakes, cheap crayons, hand-me-down shoes. But there was laughter, there was peace, and there was love. It wasn't much, but it was real. Now here I was, back in the room they thought I'd never return to, bracing for another wound, expecting silence, maybe cruelty. Never, not once, did I imagine my son would be the one holding a key I didn't even know existed. Mr. Connor hit the space bar. The screen flickered. Then my father appeared, gray sweater, thinner than I remembered, sitting at the desk from his study, same globe behind him that used to mesmerize me as a kid. His hands were clasped. His expression was tired, not angry, not bitter, just human. And the first thing he said was, "Hi, Julia. Hi, Julia." The second those words left the speakers, I stopped breathing. My father's face filled the screen. His posture was slumped a little, his gray sweater softening the edges of a man I only remembered as rigid and sharp. Behind him was that old oak desk, same one he used to sit at while barking at bills or writing up business plans in silence. But this version of him didn't bark. He looked tired, not in a weak way, in a human way. "If you're watching this," he said, "I'm gone." And I'm guessing the reading didn't go smoothly. I felt every eye in the room shift slightly in my direction, but I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was frozen in that chair. Eli's hand rested lightly on mine. Somehow, that kept me grounded. Dad inhaled, slow and careful. "I know what they think of you, what I let them think. Hell, what I said about you." His voice cracked slightly. "I was wrong. That was when my chest caved, like something had been sitting there for years, heavy and unseen, and just now let go. I believed Karen when she told me you were selfish. I believed Rick when he said you didn't want this family. I didn't ask questions. I didn't listen. He looked down, rubbed his hands together. That twitch in his fingers, I had that, too. I'd hated it growing up, always trying to hide it, but now it was there on screen, and I watched it like it was something sacred. You tried. He continued, and I shut the door in your face, on you, on Eli. I didn't even give you the decency of a conversation. I thought being strong meant being right. His eyes lifted back to the camera. I couldn't stop staring. But strength, he said, is protecting your child. And you did that. You did what I should have done. I don't remember when the tears started. I just remember feeling the sting of salt down my face and not caring. He paused, looked off to the side. I met Eli, you know, the day he dropped off something with Glenn, just the two of us. I asked him about you. You know what he said? Dad swallowed. His mouth pressed into a small line before he whispered. He said, "My mom is the safest place in the world." The room went completely still. No coughing, no chair creaks, just silence so pure it was like sound itself had left the building. I covered my mouth with my hand. My other hand clutched Eli's fingers like they were the last solid thing in the world. Dad leaned in slightly. I lost you. Julia, I see that now. I lost my daughter because I didn't stop to love her the way she needed. But I'm not going to let my last act be shutting you out again. He pulled something off-camera papers maybe. I couldn't tell and held them up briefly. I changed the will, the house. It's yours, the savings, the retirement. It all goes to you and Eli, and there's a college fund in his name. There was a collective shift in the room, a deep breath, a crack of chairs leaning. I didn't turn to look. I didn't care. I know it doesn't fix anything, he said. It won't undo the years I was cold, or the silence, or the hurt. But maybe it gives you a little peace. Maybe it gives you something I never could. He nodded once, and if they're angry, let them be angry. You earned this. You walked through fire, and you never stopped being a mother. That's more than I ever managed. His eyes were wet now, just like mine. I'm proud of you. Julia, I always was. I just didn't know how to say it. I broke then, silent, shaking sobs that I didn't try to hide, because these were the words I'd needed for years. Not money, not a house, just this. Take care of Eli, Dad said softly, and tell him thank you. Then the screen went black. No fade, no music, just silence. A silence so still it almost rang. I don't know how long we sat like that. No one moved, no one spoke. Even Connor froze for a moment, his hand still hovering over the laptop's touchpad. I think he didn't want to break it either. Eventually, Karen stood. Her chair screeched loud against the hardwood floor. She grabbed her purse like it had betrayed her and stormed out without saying a word. Neil followed her, red-faced and mumbling, but no one was really listening to him. Rick stayed seated, jaw clenched, arms crossed. For a second, I thought he might speak. He looked at Connor like he was trying to summon a protest, some legal argument to reverse the air that had just shifted in the room. But he didn't, because deep down, he knew there was nothing to fight. My father had spoken, not just in a will, but with his whole heart, and that kind of truth is unignorable. One by one, the rest filtered out. A few gave me long looks, some were pity, a few maybe regret. I didn't return them. I didn't have to. I wasn't there to be seen. I had already been seen. Soon, it was just me, Eli, and Mr. Mr. Connor. He cleared his throat quietly and closed the folder. There'll be some paperwork, he said, but everything's in order. I nodded, couldn't say much, didn't need to. He gave me a small, warm smile, the kind that says, "This mattered," and walked out, leaving us alone in that echoing, old room. I sat back in the chair, shoulders slack. I could still hear my father's voice, still see that tired man in the sweater I thought he never wore. "I'm proud of you." 3 words. And they rearranged the floor beneath me. The door clicked shut behind Mr. Connor, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe. The air still smelled like dust and worn leather, but the heaviness that had wrapped around me since the moment I walked in, it was gone. It wasn't just relief. It wasn't even vindication. It was peace. I looked over at Eli. He was still sitting quietly beside me, hands in his lap, his legs swinging just slightly under the chair. Not a word, just that same calm presence he always carried, like it was part of his skin. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind his ear. He looked up at me with a small smile. "Was that okay?" he asked softly. I couldn't help it. I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes right after a good, hard cry. "Yeah," I said, my voice cracking. That was more than okay. I leaned down and kissed the top of his head. "You did something really big today, Eli." He tilted his head. "I just wanted you to hear him, and I had, not just with my ears, but in my chest, in the place that had been silent for years. We didn't rush to leave. There wasn't any reason to. Everyone else had fled like the truth was contagious. Karen couldn't look me in the eye. Rick had nothing left to say. The cousins, the family friends, they just drifted out, unsure of where they stood anymore. The foundation they built their opinions on had been pulled out from under them in a 6-minute video. I sat back in that creaky chair and let the stillness settle. Let the quiet be something different than it used to be. This silence wasn't rejection. It wasn't exile. It was full of what was said, full of what had finally been heard. I kept hearing my dad's voice, over and over, like it had found a home in my head. "I'm proud of you. You never stopped being a mother. I always was. I just didn't know how to say it. It didn't erase the pain, didn't undo the years, but it did something I never thought possible. It made them matter. The years I spent surviving, hoping, doubting they were seen now, named, acknowledged by the one person I had needed it from the most. Eventually, Eli stood and tugged gently at my sleeve. Ready to go, I looked around the room one last time. Same table, same chairs, same yellow-stained walls. But it didn't feel the same anymore. I stood and took his hand. We walked out together, and I realized I wasn't carrying anything extra with me. No shame, no guilt, no silence, just Eli and the truth. The next few weeks were full of logistics, legal paperwork, property transfers, a few awkward calls from people trying to rewrite their behavior. I didn't entertain most of them. I wasn't interested in explanations. I didn't need apologies that only came after the will changed. The house would take some fixing. It had sat still for too long. Paint peeling, pipes creaky, a roof that would probably need replacing come winter. But it was ours. Eli picked his room on the first visit, 2nd floor. Corner window, lots of sun. I let him, told him he could paint the walls whatever color he wanted. He chose a deep green, said it felt like calm. I couldn't argue with that, sometimes at night. I sit on the old porch swing, the one that groans with every shift of weight, and I think about how close I came to never hearing any of it. If Eli hadn't spoken up, If he hadn't kept that envelope, if he hadn't believed, even when I didn't, sometimes the people we love are too tired to fight for themselves. And that's when it takes someone smaller, braver, to hold the truth long enough for them to see it. People still talk. Of course they do. Karen moved out of state a month after the reading. Some say she couldn't take the looks. Others say she got a job offer. I don't know. I don't ask. She hasn't reached out. I'm not holding my breath. Rick sent me a letter, a real one, handwritten. It said, "In short, I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. That chapter was closed. Some mornings I walked through the house barefoot, touching the walls, flipping light switches, listening to the floorboards creak beneath my feet. This house, the one I was never supposed to inherit, the one I was erased from, now filled with Eli's laughter, his sneakers, his Legos scattered across every flat surface. It doesn't feel like my father's house anymore. It feels like ours. And that's enough. Before all this, I thought healing had to come from others, that someone needed to reach back and pull me forward. But sometimes, healing is when you finally stop waiting. Sometimes, it's a quiet boy pulling a letter from his backpack. Sometimes, it's a voice you thought was gone, saying words you never expected. Sometimes, it's you sitting in the ruins of what they built and deciding not to feel small anymore. I walked into that law office feeling like a footnote. I walked out holding my son's hand, with my father's voice still echoing in my chest, not broken, whole, and I know this now. Sometimes it takes a child to carry the truth you were too tired to hold.